Louise was sat there when you were explaining.
Yeah.
I'll
Feed it back. So
yeah, it's just that it would help. That was all.
It's all online, and the mod stuff's good once you get on it.
Okay, so thank you very much for coming along to this evening's educational skills and employment committee. I've got very bad feedback there.
Yeah, should be okay now.
Okay, yes. Apologies. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. Have we got any apologies for absence, please?
We've received apologies from Councillor Lee Wilt.
Thank you. And the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November 2021, can I sign them as a true and accurate record?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And item 3 is members' declarations of interest. Any declarations?
No.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so item 4 is the special educational needs and disabilities briefing. I've got Helen Redding to do this, and Helen's not here at the moment.
Councillor Edwards, I'll pick that up. Helen is still interviewing a service manager for SEND, so I'm going to pick it up. So if we record her apologies, then I'll do my very best Helen Redding impression.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. So over to you.
Thank you. Can we show the presentation, Fab?
Somebody see the message from Leanne regarding a link? She can't find the link.
I've just forwarded her the link.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay,
Anne-Marie, do you want to just wait a few minutes until...
Yeah, no problem.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Chairman, I also had trouble finding the link. I don't know whether there was something slightly less information this time, but I really struggled for several minutes to work out where it was.
Okay, no worries. We'll make that clearer, I think, then actually on the agenda itself. I think that might be easier.
Yeah.
Normally you go into the diary, but the first time I tried, it wouldn't let me. It wasn't until the second time the diary let me in.
Okay. Yeah, we'll certainly look at that as well. Thank you, Philip. I've heard somebody join, but I can't see everybody because I've got the... Jenny, do you know who just joined?
I think it might have been Kathy.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That's Leanne.
Should be on the way now as well.
Yeah. Yep, just joined. Hello then.
Perfect. Thank you. Hello, Leanne. Okay, Anne-Marie, thank you very much.
Thanks. So I'm going to give you an update this afternoon on progressive SEND work in North Northampton, and I think after that we're going to pick up on the high needs block. So key themes, excuse me, I can't quite see the screen, that's better. Key themes that have been become clear really, I think, from the work that we've done so far is co-production really is a big area of focus for us, and it's one of the areas that we want to address first. And the reason that we want to address co-production first, people might say, well, aren't you getting on with the business? But actually what we want to do is we want to co-produce everything that we're doing going forward. So co-production is not embedded. It should be embedded in all that we're doing across SEND, and indeed it should be part and parcel of how we do business right across the piece, so not just SEND. We are working with the Send Accountability Board to look at a shared understanding of co-production and what that means, and I'll come on to a slide on that in a few minutes. There's not yet a shared and agreed understanding across our strategic partners, and when I'm talking about our strategic partners, I'm talking predominantly around our colleagues in health and social care, about what co-production really means, because there can be many different activities, if you like, that are badged as co-production but aren't true co-production. So what we want to do is then co-produce a clear vision and agreed priorities on which we will provide our business going forward, so that we make Send everybody's business, and we can only truly do that when it is co-produced. Expectations of all partners around implementation of a graduated approach to Send are also being clearly articulated and linked to any of the pathways and any of the guidance that we have existing. We will also be looking for a communication strategy and a plan to ensure that all partners are supported and influence the delivery of any of our strategic plans or our operational activity going forward. So they're the key areas of business for a start off. Next slide, please. So co-production with families is really about changing the way we work together operationally and strategic with families and with service, so that everybody has a voice in the work that we're doing on SEND. It's very much, in its simplest form, we're doing with and not doing to. So again, that's why I said it's good practice for every area of our business, not just our work on SEN. One of the challenges, of course, when you are legitimately and genuinely co-producing, is things take much longer, because there are more voices to listen to, there are more people to be heard, and there are more people to help to understand about direction and where we're at. So there can be some frustration from different parties that they're not seeing enough progress rapidly enough, but the reason being is we're trying to bring everyone with us at every stage. The ambition of co-production then is to get the parental confidence, or the confidence of children and young people, that we're identifying what they're telling us as a problem, or what they're telling us as a challenge, or what they're telling us in fact is good and it's working for them, and we're meeting their needs. Next slide, please. So this is the stages of co-production, and what is and what isn't co-production. And I'm sure if colleagues take a minute to read what's on here about what is doing with, what's doing for, and what's doing to, you will recognise different elements of work on there that often get badged as co-production, but actually it's not genuine co-production. So genuine co-production is those top ones there: co-production and co-design. It's when you are actively doing with your partners, your children, your families. It's a reciprocal arrangement. You're listening, you're sharing, you're understanding. Often the next category there, the green category, we're doing for engagement, consultation, and informing people, often gets badged as co-production. And certainly some of the conversations that we've had with our health partners in particular, who would tell us, not meaning to confuse or to over-egg it, but they've talked to us about co-production, and actually when we've scrutinized what is being co-produced, we've found that actually maybe it's consultation or whether it's engagement. Of course, engagement, consultation are good practice, but we want to do more than that. We genuinely want to co-produce and we want to co-design. And then at the bottom there, education and coercion. Education obviously is not a negative word, but coercion is a negative word there. It's trying to fix people who are passive recipients to a service. So we're doing to. So we're trying to shift from services that do to our children, families, our parents, our carers, our partners. We're not doing it for them. So we're not consulting on what we've already decided, but we're very genuinely co-producing. So we're bringing them in from the final stage. So as I said, I'm doing my very best Helen Redding impression today, because actually Helen was interviewing for a new service manager for the Education, Health and Care Service today. And actually we were doing that through co-production. So we had members of the Parent Carer Forum actually on the panel with an equal voice to officers, making decisions about who the best person is to take on that service manager for the education, health and care service. So that was genuine co-design of the interview process and co-production. So hopefully a very much a shared result, assuming that the guys that have been interviewing today are able to make an appointment. So that's some of the difference. Next slide, please. So in terms of the parent carer forum, there's a single parent carer forum across Northamptonshire. We've had a number of discussions since I started with the Department for Education and indeed with the Parent Carer Forum about, do we want one Parent Carer Forum? Do we want a North one? Do we want a West one? What the parent carers are telling us is they want to stay as one single Parent Carer Forum. So in the spirit of co-production, we are respecting that and we are going to work with that single forum. I know the DFE have put a lot of pressure on that we separate it and we run 2 forums, but our Parent Carer Forum is saying they want to stay as one, and therefore we need to listen to that. We think we can work at this stage with one Parent Carer Forum, but of course the door is always open to us changing our decision on that and having separate forum as we go forward. So we will see how that works. As I said, we're working to embed co-production with the parent carers and young people in all of our partnership work on SEND. So they will be involved in the SEND Accountability Board. They'll also be involved in a SEND Improvement Board that we're going to have for Northamptonshire. They have been involved, as I've said today, in the interviews for the service manager for education, health and care. So we are genuinely co-producing now. So again, people may get frustrated that they're seeing a lack of pace, but obviously these things take more time when you do them genuinely. So we also be using young people. Well, it was our intention, we were using young people to support the recruitment again of the key posts, but unfortunately, courtesy of the changes in the COVID restriction today, at the end of last week, the school that were going to support us and provide young people for us felt that they couldn't do that. They didn't want extra people coming to the school. We respect that decision. So we were unable to use it as had planned at that stage, but we did still go ahead with the parent carer board. Next slide, please. Thank you. SEND Accountability Board, I think we have mentioned that in this forum before. So that is a board which consists of representatives of all key partners. It reaches across Northamptonshire, North and West. And it's a meeting that it'll gather on a monthly basis, and in the first instance it will drive the SEND agenda. And what do I mean by that? In the first stages it will look at a diagnostic, so certainly looking at the data. It will support a self-evaluation in there, and then it will also start to oversee the development and the implementation of a local SEND strategic plan. There will be different self-evaluations completed for North and West, because we will be inspected separately as North and West, and we will also have our own SEND strategic plan. So for Northampton, we'll have a self-evaluation and we'll have a SEND strategic plan. The board is securing the engagement of all the key partners. That includes local partners, local strategic partners, but also we have representation on there from the Department for Education, who have a watch and brief on our development work on SEND. We will oversee the delivery then of both strategic and operational functions, and we will split that work eventually into work streams so that we can ensure that the due processes are followed and appropriate scrutiny of all the activity and the progress that we're making is taken into account in different work streams. We will also, again, as I mentioned on an earlier slide, a communication strategy or a communication plan is really key as we share the work and the progress that we're making, because sometimes it's more difficult to see some of the things that are going on in the background, but we'll have a key communication strategy as part of that. That board will make recommendations to Northamptonshire council services, but it will also make recommendations to some of our key stakeholders. So it may make recommendations for pathways, for example, around ASD diagnoses, or some work around speech, language and communication needs with a crossover there with the integrated care system. Importantly, it'll provide challenge and support that will improve outcomes for children. So challenging and supporting strategic partners. There will be challenge and support from the parent carers and from the young people's voice that will be present on that SEND accountability board. Next slide, please. In terms of SEND data, there is a wealth of data out there. We haven't always pulled it into the same place so that we can see a good and a sound overview of all things special educational needs and disabilities. Helen is doing a grand job at the minute of collating that data, identifying when there's further data that we would need that would assist us in understanding what we need to do and how well we're doing. We'll also audit that data and the information that we get in to make sure that we understand it in the right way, and also that it's triangulated. So we'll test it, we'll challenge it, so that we can see it and use it. The data obviously will underpin and inform our self-evaluation, so we know exactly where we're at and where we need to get to, and it will also, obviously the self-evaluation and the data combined will inform what our strategic plan is and our strategic direction is, and that will be communicated with partners. So a lot of this, as you can see, loops back. The initial data on the SEND profile across North and West Northamptonshire has been presented to the SEND Accountability Board. There are some discrepancies in there in terms of how data in North and West is presented in terms of what the picture is, not how the data is presented. But what we're seeing difference in North and West, one of those is the prevalence of autistic spectrum disorders and speech and language and communication. So rather than just present to you a set of data now, we are providing some challenge and some testing of that data to see if what has been presented is the reality. So we're triangulating that with feedback from parents and carers, from children, from settings, to see if the data is actually the same as the lived experience of our children, families. There's a joint agency working group being set up, which is developing those data sets and the interrogation that I've said, to make sure that any early hypotheses have an evidence base and the narrative that supports them, so that we can make sure that when we do set out on our improvement journey, that we're setting out in the right direction with a shared understanding. And again, it's tested with parents. So what we think we see in the data, we're checking in with parents, with children and families, that is their lived experience. Next slide, thanks. And this is where we get into some of the detail, really. Education, health and care plans. I know that the people on the call today, a lot of you are quite familiar with this, and I appreciate that a lot, as elected members, you get a lot of queries and a lot of questions from your residents about some of the information and some of the practice and the process around education, health and care planning. I think what this slide shows for you is the very sharp increase that we are seeing in demand for education, health and care plans. Now, that demand is not down to one thing alone, and we are testing a number of hypotheses on that. So we've had obviously a delay over the last 2 years as a result of COVID, and many children not being in the classrooms or in schools, because predominantly these requests come out of the schools. We've seen a steady increase, if you like, from April and the setup of the new council. I think what is important to point out is that previously the average number of requests for education, health and care assessment were circa between 32 and 36 a month. So if you look at this year, sort of August would be typical. Now, 32 and 36 a month, we're in the peak months. What we're seeing now, so for example, November, 90, that's nearly 300% more in terms of demand on the service and on the system than we would ever have seen previously. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. You know, COVID will be one of those reasons, but there are also reasons around the distribution of high needs funding, how we're putting challenge into the system earlier on, what we're asking schools to provide for children into evidence before they go in there, but before they go to request for assessment. But you can see that recently we've agreed additional funding for the service to take it from 6 practitioners up to an additional 12 practitioners on there. But again, the demand is far outstripping what we have. And December so far, that's not today's data, that is data at the beginning of last week. So 1 week into December, there had been 36 requests for education, health and care assessments immediately. So the numbers are growing. Next slide, please. So in terms of SEND service, as I've just said, an additional 12 caseworkers to keep pace with demand there, managing the increase for assessments. And as some of you will know, that actually it's not like a social care assessment that you intervene for a period and you make good whatever the need or the risk was to a child and then you close it. Essentially, predominantly these plans, once a child has a plan, it stays with them till the 24-year-old. So you can imagine there's much greater demand then post 16. The plans don't just stop when a child reaches 16 or 18 and it goes with them while they're staying in education. So the additional years that we're supporting the children and the additional demand is placing a huge amount of pressure on the service. We have got a lot of work to do with the workforce. We have got a lot of work to do around how they communicate and what they communicate. We've got a lot of challenge in the system in terms of getting those education, health and care plans delivered in the 20-week statutory time frame. And what we are part of, as are the West, is a pilot project with the Council for Disabled Children about outcomes-based SEND data dashboards. So again, a different way of looking at our data, a different way of understanding what we're doing in terms of our business and how we're trying to improve. Next slide, I think. No,
That's the last one.
that's the last one. Thanks. So I'm happy to take any questions if I can. I've lost.
Scott, you're on mute.
There's always one, isn't there? Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I thought that was a very informative presentation, and thank you. And you know, there is a plan moving forward for this. I guess my concern is I know we've increased the number of workers looking at these cases, but certainly November to have 90 cases and December 36 was it, I think, within 1 week. And of course, that's only going to increase this week's, I guess, the next week's. Do you see any problem with this in not meeting the 20-week deadline?
I mean, there's no getting away from it, Councillor Edwards. We are having real significant problems in meeting the 20-week deadline, and our performance, our statutory performance on meeting that 20-week deadline is inadequate. It's not close to what it needs to be. I think it's important to point out as well that there's a shared responsibility on this. So, you know, whether we do or we don't meet the 20-week deadline is not just around the performance of an education, health and care service. It's also around the performance of the educational psychology service. It's about the performance of the health services and the provision of their reports. It's about provision of reports from social care colleagues. It's about the availability of practitioners being able to go into schools and to understand the needs of the children and get first-hand, you know, engagement from the schools. There are also challenges when we get draft plans. There's a statutory process of consultation that we absolutely must go through. part of that consultation is we have to consult with a number of mainstream providers, and getting responses for those consultations sometimes takes longer. So then of course we've got the question when we need a very specialist, some children need very specialist and very specific provision. It's not always easy to access that provision. We have to consult with specialist provision to get that. And if we've gone through a first round of consultation and everyone that we've consulted with has said, no, we can't provide or we can't meet the needs, and we have to go back out and find other providers to, you know, to support that, then we can get into a really difficult position where we're kind of stuck without a provision. So then we start to name a type of provision, but for the family then there is still frustration because they want to know where their child is going to go to school, they want to know how they're going to be educated, they want to know what that wraparound care and support is going to look like. And the plan can get stuck in the system because there are a number of moving parts in this. Now, it's not an excuse, and that's why something like the SEND Accountability Board is essential in terms of moving performance forward, because that brings the key players around the table, holding them all to account. We've never looked at a multi-agency data set in the way that we're now starting to look at a multi-agency data set. So from a local authority perspective, we can hold our hands up at the minute and go, absolutely, we're not getting our plans out in 20 weeks. But once we start to get into the detail of that, we will find out that there are a number of other component parts that aren't performing adequately in terms of getting to the conclusion of that plan and being able to communicate that with families. Now, are there things as a local authority we can do differently? Yes, of course there are. We can communicate in a different way. We can communicate more clearly. We can communicate more consistently. We can communicate even when we've got nothing to communicate, but just keeping in touch with those children and families and saying, look, we haven't got a placement. These are the things that we've tried. And I think what historically we have done is we've sat back until we've got the solution and we've got the answer. And that gap and that lack of communication when we still haven't got a solution has caused us more problems than we might have had. So that there's much to learn that isn't just about statutory performance on this. But I am concerned. It's not an issue that's particular to Northamptonshire. It's a national issue, but that doesn't mean there's any solace in that for children and families and parents who are worried about their children. And actually, we need to marry both of those challenges, really.
Thank you. And I think actually one of those statements that you said there about the communication is absolutely right. And I think a lot of parents, where they just don't hear anything, that's when they start to have cause for concern. Yeah. And I think you're right. Even if you're communicating that there is no kind of outcome at the moment, but we are still looking into it and moving it forward, I think that communication is a lot better than like you say, no communication at all. Yeah.
I think that's, that is, for me, that's a cultural issue, and that's an issue that I'm working on it, day in, day out with the services that I'm responsible for, about how we communicate, when we communicate, being brave enough to have some of those difficult conversations and being able and being supported by the local authority to say to parents, we haven't got a solution for you yet, but I'm going to tell you what we've done. So, in my simple form, I will tell people to share their workings out. We all did that when we did our O levels, if we're old enough, or our GCSEs if we're young enough, and we were always told all the way through our education to show your working out. Why is it then we get into the professional environment and we forget to show people our working out? So if we can get that into people's mindset so that they know that we're trying, we know that their children matter, they know that we're trying to do things. It might not be the perfect answer, it might not be the perfect solution, but people don't feel like they've been forgotten about or they've been lost in the system. And I think culturally we've got to push through that.
Absolutely. And just one final thing, sorry, I know I've got some hands. I really do like the dashboard, because I think looking for statistics can be one hell of a job sometimes, because they're all over the place, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to find those statistics. So to bring them all together in one area, yeah, absolutely is the right thing. So brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Wendy.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. You mentioned that previously the average number of SEND assessments were 32, 33. I'm presuming that is just for Northants, not across Northamptonshire. So I've only got a quick question. I wondered roughly what percentage of the assessments resulting an education healthcare plan?
That, Councillor Brackenby, that's something I've asked to get that breakdown. So we haven't previously been recording that. So that's one of the challenges when you look at the data that we're asked for. So for colleagues that have been around the social care environment for a number of years, I'm sure that you'll be very familiar in terms of understanding, social care requests for assessment and how many result in an actual child and family assessment. And we're trying to look at requests for education, health and care plans in the same way, so that we can see the conversion rate, if you like, in layman's terms, as to how many requests we receive and then where we go to. But the other thing that we want to get ahead of as well, when we receive a request for an education, health and care plan, if that education, health and care plan isn't the final destination, if you like, for our young person, what is? So what was the offer? What have we gone on to do? And preempting, if I might, Councillor Edwards, some of the other questions that we might get asked about high needs funding, and I know we're going to come on to that later this evening. Previously, what we have seen is some schools have, rather than go for an education, health and care plan, they've gone towards high needs funding. And what that means for our children is, yes, they can have their education needs met, for example, in a school setting while that child is in that school setting. But when that child changes schools or changes phases, you get a cliff edge. And you get a cliff edge there in September, where children are in new settings or in new arrangements, when they haven't got a wraparound assessment and a wraparound plan, and the resource that they need to thrive hasn't gone with them. So there are also some cultural and some fundamental structural issues there around high needs funding and how that is distributed, and how right across the sector we understand, is this a long-term need for our child, or is this a short-term fix? And I think that's where the question is. If it's short-term and we need to do something immediately over the shorter term, then maybe high needs funding is a fix. If it's a long-term issue for a child, then absolutely that child should have an education, health and care plan, because we know we've got appropriate management around it, we've got appropriate accountability around it, and we can bring in the partners as required, and again hold those partners to account for the provision of service, of intervention that meet the needs of the child over the longer term. So there's, I don't mean to make it complicated, because actually it's not complicated, but there are many moving parts to this.
Thank you.
That was a very long. That was a very long.
No, it's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy.
Well, I have more than one question actually to ask. So my first question is, how many psychologists do we actually have working in the county at the moment? Educated psychologists.
No, I can't give you an answer off the top of my head, but I can get back to you on that. But just so you are aware, we employ them, but we also use associates. So there are many answers to that. There's not one answer to that, but I will get back with that information, Chair.
So do we actually employ education psychologists within the county, and then we have consultants that we bring in as well? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So my second question is, given the fact that last week we decided in Northants Council at a meeting that we're going to have our own person for North looking after education and children's services, how does that affect what you just said about the SEND programme? Because you were saying that they want to carry on north and west. If we go down this route, that is what is now decided, how does that stack up?
So sorry, Kathy. Many of our partners around SEND that we have around the table work across both North and West Northants. And if we are going to get the most appropriate buy-in and engagement of our partners, the easiest way we can do that is by making it as easy as possible for our partners and not setting ourselves up against West. So where we have predominantly partners that are across North and West, it's absolutely right and proper that we have a single board. And I'm understanding, Councillor Maxwell, that you're talking about separate directors of children's services.
That's
then
right.
Those separate directors of children's services would sit on the same board.
Right.
The same will be true of the Safeguarding Children Partnership, etc. So it's appropriate in line with our partners' requirements.
My next question is that given actually this week I actually met someone whose child is still waiting for an assessment. This particular child can't communicate at all. He can hear, but he can't communicate. He's very hyperactive. He's in a class of 30 people, and nothing, no, I wouldn't say nothing, but because he's not been assessed, that means his mother thinks he's in the wrong setting, which is probably right in that sense. So you were saying that you're looking at 20 weeks as a statutory deadline. That somewhat worries me because some children who went into reception last September, and I know this for a fact, have still not been assessed, where the actual teacher is teaching a class of 30 and is waiting for say a particular child to be assessed. In the meantime, here we are in December. They knew in March, well, they knew in June, July that they were going to have these children. Isn't that a bit worrying that we're not assessing? I know I can understand that you are sort of short of people, but the thing is that child has caused quite a bit of disruption to the class in the meantime. So how long do you think this 20 weeks is going to be extended then?
First of all, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on a child in this forum specifically. Yeah. It wouldn't be appropriate without a head teacher of a school to comment on the performance of the school or the internal processes of the school in terms of the request for assessment. I think what I have said is we are, 20 weeks is the statutory time frame. I have been really clear that we are not hitting that statute, in the majority of cases, we are not hitting that 20-week time frame. We have had, just to put it into context, we have 6 practitioners on the books, if you like, currently. They're not all at work at the same time through a result of very different reasons, including some long-term COVID sickness absence. The case managers in that team, which is why we've seen the additional investment and we're recruiting 12, we're increasing the size of that team significantly. They're carrying caseloads of in the region of 500 children. So that in part, as well as the system-wide issues that I've also explained to you, is why there is a delay on getting this work through. But it's an issue that Kathy and I discuss regularly. It's an issue that I discuss regularly with Councillor Edwards in terms of his one-to-one meetings. It's an issue that's discussed regularly with the Chief Exec. It is on the agenda of everybody that needs to understand it, and we are being very honest and transparent about the levels of performance. So we're doing all we can. Are we happy with it? Of course we're not, but we're still pushing.
So
and I think, sorry, Dorothy, sorry, I will come back to you, Dorothy, but one second. And I think you're absolutely right with that, Anne-Marie, that, we are being open and transparent about this. We are letting people know the situation. We are letting people know the plans moving forward. And I think this is the right way of going about it rather than, sweeping it under the carpet. And I think what Anne-Marie just said is absolutely right. There's not a week goes by where we don't mention it and talk about it. And just to go back, Dorothy, to the first point that you raised about a family that if you want to drop me an email and I'll speak to Anne-Marie and Kathy about it and we can have a look into that situation as well, rather than on here, because obviously a lot of that is private and sensitive information. we can look into it and then come back to you on it, on that specific family and also the specific school.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not going into the details of the actual people, because that would be breaching confidentiality. Mike, you're actually saying that you have 500 children and one person oversees 500 children. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good grief. So are you saying then at the moment for the whole of the county, we have 6 people looking after these children? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I said.
And how long has that been going on for?
I mean, again, the numbers are going up. We've discussed it. I think we've discussed it here. It's, you know, as Councillor Edwards and Kathy are suggesting, it's an ongoing conversation about our concern for, you know, requests for assessments and the work that's ongoing. So there is, you know, we've had 6 workers. We're recruiting an additional 12 workers.
Yeah.
There are a number of other issues that we need to look at in terms of a fix on this. This is not about just getting the additional workers, because that's not going to fix the problem. There are many ways that we need to address this, but yes, it is an area of concern. It's an area of risk.
And I mean, I'm a teacher, so I do know some aspects of this, but I find it worrying to think that you're put under this pressure, or you've been under this pressure for some time, and yet, given the fact that the county is expanding, you know, you've had more schools added to it, and young people, larger numbers. Clearly, this has meant that this is why children are not able to be assessed quicker, isn't it, really?
Well, I think, Dorothy, I think it's a combination of things that Anne-Marie has said. You know, it's not just about that, it's about the other departments that have to contribute towards it as well, which is why it's a good thing about getting them all around a table to kind of sort it out there and then, and to each area to look at what they need to do. So I think it's a combination of issues, Dorothy, rather than just one thing.
Well, I realise that. I do appreciate that it will be a combination. I would be interested to get the information about how many ed sites there are in the county. But I think equally, I mean, I hope that that we clearly need to employ more than even 12 if we're going to actually get through the caseload of the amount of children out there in schools who at the moment are still waiting, not only to be assessed, but to be put in the right school.
Yeah. I was just going to point out that's not 500 cases all waiting for assessment.
No.
So the caseloads of 500 children, some of those will have already had assessments, but they need reviews. So the caseload is slightly mixed. So I wouldn't want you to think there are 500 children.
No, I appreciate that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I do appreciate
and
that. Yeah.
You know, the council has absolutely listened and demonstrated a commitment by agreeing to 12 extra workers. And so we're in the middle of recruiting those. And I think it's fair to say, and rightly so, the expectation of the councils and yourselves as members is that we look at how we manage the work. And then part of the work that we need to do is review and assess how those functions are delivered, and can we do anything differently to enable that work to go through the system. So once we get through what perhaps is perceived as a bulge of work, what is the normal state? Because obviously the number of assessment requests has gone up. Is that just COVID? Is that going to mellow out over time? Or is this going to be business as usual? And some of that work is also what we need to do. So then we can come back and say, actually, we don't just need 12 workers, we need X amount of workers, because this is what the norm is. So that again is something that we have to look at. But once, you know, it is something that everybody is aware of and they are addressing and concerned about, which is the right thing to do. And we're moving forward from the position that we were in.
And is it, can I just ask the last question is there a difference between this year and last year and maybe the previous year before, that the numbers of people who do need assessments, has that increased? I'm not talking about because of COVID, but has that increased because children are becoming more, it's more aware, the awareness within the school or within teachers realising that they're not meeting their needs because of them needing extra support. And of course, if they need extra support, this is the biggest issue, is that the school cannot employ an extra TA within that classroom to help that particular child, for instance, because without the assessment, they can't apply for the funding. That is the problem that some schools are facing. Would you not agree?
I think we can come back to you, Dorothy, with statistics. I'm pretty sure Anne-Marie hasn't got the past 3 years statistics on her, but we can come back. I will say that I'm guessing because of, you know, lockdown 1, 2 and 3, that a lot of children won't have been at school and therefore won't have, you know, been assessed or even put forward for assessment, which is why we're experiencing larger numbers than perhaps usual. But absolutely, we can get those figures to you, Dorothy.
And can I just ask you, if schools have to, the schools as it stands at the moment, they have to apply for the funding only when the child's been assessed. So until the child gets the assessment, the school can't then employ a TA to help that particular child. Is there any way around that if you've got large amount of people to assess?
If I can come in here,
yeah.
I think it's very difficult to consider that a child's needs equals a TA. I think what we have to consider is that all children's needs are different. And so therefore there is the possibility, and there's something called a graduated approach that we need to put in place. And we need to support schools, and we can do that in a range of ways to manage the children within the school. We have to work with schools to think about, can we work in more inclusion rather than children coming out of mainstream education into different or special placements, but also what can we do as a council to support children and support schools. So support to a young person and school doesn't equal a TA, but support to the school might mean that we consider the needs of the child and we actually put support in some way, which doesn't lead to an EHC sometimes, but we have to work with the school, and it's always done on an individual basis. But again, it's part of that whole work that Anne-Marie described as part of the presentation, is how does the system work across the system, health, across the partnership with education, social care, how does that all work, and are we getting it right? And if we're not, what can we do differently?
Yeah, thank you.
Super, thank you. Leanne.
Good evening. It's been so far gone that I can't possibly make a joke about the O-levels, but just so everyone knows, I'm in the GCSE category. It doesn't work anymore, it's been too far. Great that you're doing the co-design. I think that really not just is the right thing for the people, but actually when you're designing long term, it makes a better result, doesn't it? Because sometimes we need jerk, and we do too. So that my only comment was that's great to hear that you're doing. In terms of the next one's linked, your parent carer forum and your SEND accountability board, is there any member representative on those?
So I sit on the SEND accountability board, yes.
What about the parent carer forum?
I don't sit on that.
No.
Or do I? No, I don't sit on it.
I wonder if there's any opportunities. I think, I mean, obviously we're in COVID 0.4, 0.1, whatever version of COVID we're on now. But it would be nice to be able to have some kind of engagement beyond just, for example, the EAP, and then we have our briefings. But it would be nice to see real life, you know, what that means and be involved, because as councillors, often we've got other skill sets, and I've worked on many partnership boards where members have been an asset in, you know, working groups and those sorts of things. So is there any opportunity on these kind of boards to have more representative than maybe just the chair?
I don't know what the I don't know what the constitution says about that. I'd have to refer to Kathy or Anne Marie actually on that.
I think in terms of the Parent Carer Forum, I think a directive, because it's not, you know, it's not a local authority. We don't set it up. It's not our board. It's not, you know, it's not ours. I think it's the easiest way to say it. I think if you wanted to engage with that, I think that would be, or any members wanted to engage with that, I think it would be worthwhile a conversation with the chair of the Parent Carer Forum. Councillor Edwards, if you want me to pass on those details to share, I'd be happy to do that. But again, you know, they are their own body. They are a group, a reference group for us, if you like, and a statutory partner for us. So it would be up to them.
Yeah, and of course, you know, some people don't always like elected representatives being there. They don't feel as though that, you know, they can be themselves sometimes, I think. But yeah, do pass them on, Anne Marie, and I can certainly have a look into it, Leanne.
That's lovely, thanks. Yeah, what a massive challenge. So I presume there was a wait list before our numbers went up in terms of EHCP. So I presume, obviously, you've given us data from like April last year, but I assume there was a waiting list prior, and now we've had an exponential growth in referrals. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't want to refer to a wait list. I think there are different stages in the process. I couldn't possibly comment before April because I wasn't here and I don't have the data to hand. But it wasn't. Let's just say everything wasn't perfect before April around education, health and care plan. So it hasn't just gone wrong, if you like, or performance hasn't just dropped off since we become a new unitary council. That there were challenges in the system prior to April, and in fact there are challenges right across the nation around education, health and care. It's similar in terms of recruitment, as an example, to social work was probably 3 or 4 years ago when local authorities struggled to secure the services of social workers. So there's a national shortage of placements, there's a national demand on budget, and essentially there's a national recruitment crisis on qualified professionals to pick up many of the different roles within that: educational psychology, education, health and care, speech and language, therapists, you name it. There are challenges whichever way you cut this.
By regulation, as soon as the request comes in, this clock starts ticking. So there isn't a wait list. But as a parent, your lived experience might be that if you then get turned down for an assessment and you feel that judgment hasn't been right, it may feel as though you're then again waiting to go through that process. So, but there is a need for us to respond as soon as a parent or a school makes that request. But I can understand that sense of feeling as though you're waiting if you're not getting through the system as you think you should.
You spoke about, I think I've written this down right, outcome-based data dashboard, and then there's a pilot. It'd be lovely to hear more about that, and because that must be a huge challenge to pull all of that together. So what might that look like? My brain can't even fathom.
It's very early stages, but I think as it progresses and we're clearer on what that looks like, I'm more than happy that colleagues bring that back that know way more about the detail than I do.
Yeah, and I think, Anne Marie, I think, you know, this is something that needs to go onto the agenda again, to kind of have an update around about maybe March or April time to see where we are with this. Have we moved forward? Have, you know, the new 12 people, hopefully they'll have been recruited by then, and how's that working? You know, are the numbers dropping? Are they increasing? So just kind of an update on that, and then we can have an update on the dashboard and everything within that as well. So yeah, that would be great.
No problem.
Very, very last one, and it probably will slip into the next one when we hear more about high needs. So if somebody don't want to use the term turned down for an EHCP, but an educational health care plan isn't created for a young person because that isn't the need, would they then stay in the high needs funding? And I suppose prior to that, would you get high needs funding whilst waiting for an EHCP? And if you're turned down, if you don't have one, do you go back to high needs funding, or is it just a no more support required?
I think it's not as straightforward as any of the options that you gave me there, as always. But yeah, I will discuss high needs funding and some of the challenges we've got on there in a minute when we get onto it. So I'll pick that up if you're all right with that then.
Roger, that's great, thanks.
Thank you. Dorothy, is that your hand up again, or is it just from before?
I've just put my hand up again, actually.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Yes, go on.
So, given the challenges that you face, do you actually liaise directly with head teachers throughout the county to keep them informed about what changes you're making and how you're moving forward in making those changes?
Yeah, I write to head teachers every single week. It used to be a Friday, it's now on a Monday. We let them know of the big changes, things like the recruitment. I seek engagement from those head teachers. We looked for schools' involvement in the recruitment of the service manager today. I think we had a head teacher, or certainly someone from the school, on that recruitment panel. So yes, do all teachers respond and read it? Probably not. I don't think my newsletter is the most exciting thing that drops into their inbox on a Monday. And also I go out and talk to people, face to face, in person, on invitation. That's their invitation to me, not my invitation to them. So, we keep that dialogue open. We're trying to co-produce, as I said. So the more dialogue and the more open, transparent conversations we can have, I think the better for all of us. But that doesn't mean that we're overcoming the frustrations, and it doesn't mean that everybody wants to talk to me. So this is a work in progress.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. There is representation from head teachers on the SEND Accountability Board, and the last Accountability Board we talked about how do we communicate the work that we're doing to all partners, and that is also work in progress about what that might look like, because if they find Anne-Marie's newsletter too boring, perhaps we've got some other avenue that because it is something we need to enable heads to support and for them to understand the work that we're doing in this arena.
Yeah, thank you.
Super. Thank you. So we move on to item 5, and Anne-Marie, that's you again. So high needs funding.
Okay. So high needs funding. So there are a number of legacy issues, and I think some of them that I'll pick up on in terms of the difficult conversations, I think. But I'll talk about the finance first, because high needs funding is, after all, about money, isn't it? So high needs funding, for those of you that are familiar, forgive me, but for those of you that need a refresher or maybe aren't as familiar, high needs funding comes from the Dedicated Schools Grant. The Dedicated Schools Grant is money that belongs to the schools that we manage on their behalf, if you like. It's not our money, so we can't do what we want with it. It's very heavily restricted and governed and managed by the Department for Education. We submit a return every year, in particular around our high needs funding and how we spend it and where we spend it. If we want to make any changes to our provision and where we're spending that money and how we're spending that money, we need to seek permission from the Department for Education to make those changes. So what that would look like, that might be schools in specialist provision, might be places in units, for example. So we don't have free rein, essentially, on high needs funding and what that needs to look like. It has been quite a work in progress since I started to get a handle on high needs funding and our spend on it. So we started the year, and forgive me if this is going to come as a surprise to members that are on the call, we started the year in a 2.14 million deficit position on our high needs block of the DSG. That is a position that is managed and scrutinised through the schools forum. So Northamptonshire, not county, but Northamptonshire Council started the year with a 2.14 million deficit. So starting the year with an overspend, it's not a great place to be. In context, it is much smaller than many other local authorities around the country, but that doesn't make it feel better because it's still a deficit position. So we've still spent more money than we have. Our prediction at this stage, and this hasn't gone through the schools forum, so you kind of hearing this a little bit out of sync, but our prediction at this stage is that we will finish the year with a 3.13 million deficit position. So our deficit position will have grown potentially by 1 million. I have a number of mitigating actions that we are implementing at this stage to try and manage that. But again, as we have spoken about, we are seeing an unprecedented level of demand for services in Northamptonshire. We are under pressure like we've never been under pressure before in terms of the demand on the system. So it's more difficult to predict at this stage because the numbers are less well known to us and more unpredictable. So where is that pressure coming from? It'll be no surprise to you that some of that pressure, about 1.5 million's worth of that pressure, is coming from out of county placements. So where we don't have the correct specialist provision for our children within Northamptonshire, and those children get placed out of our boundary or out of our special schools, then there's an additional cost. So some of that pressure, circa 1.5 million, is coming from there. There is a £200,000 pressure around support to pupils with SEN outside of education, health and care system. So I think probably picking up on some of the points raised earlier about high needs funding and is that spend, yes, we are. Contrary to, I think, a recurrent and popular narrative, we are still providing high needs support and high needs funding to schools. It doesn't mean that, you know, if you've got a need, you get a teaching assistant. So it's not that clear cut. And one of the other new and emerging issues, I think, is our post-16 top-ups. So additional money that we're paying for children who are post-16. So previously we may have just paid for those children until they're 18, but if those children are now going on into further and higher education with EHCPs, then we're funding those children up to 24. So right through that age range, we are under pressure for funding for our children and young people. Now, what that has looked at in the past, and I think the last time we spoke about SEN, it was one of the issues I said then, it has been a priority of mine to go through every line of that high needs funding. We're still doing that, we're still not through it. I have assurance from the head of SEND and from finance colleagues that where we have high needs spend attached to individual children, we are confident that that is right and it's proper, it's going in the right directions, it's linked to education, health and care assessments, or it's linked to that child in an appropriate way that is will stand up to scrutiny, if you like, and stand up to challenge. I think where we have greater challenges, and it's some of the issues that have been asked about, well, if it's this, will it be this, and will they get this funding? And if they haven't got an education, health and care plan, can they have X, Y, and Z? Some of that funding is around service level agreements that we have. There are some challenges about those service level agreements and whether we are appropriately managing and testing and challenging them and calling in a challenge on service level agreements as you would want us to with the spend of public money. So there's some questions there that need to be answered. And then there is also some questions that need to be answered for previous and historic commitments of spend to schools, for children, for units that technically aren't units as the DFE would recognise. So, for example, classes that have had a number of children that have said, well, if we call it a unit, can we have additional funding? So there's a number of historic previous arrangements that will need to be scrutinised and challenged and tested. That is likely to mean that it puts us in the position where we're having a lot of very difficult conversations with head teachers. And it may be that we need to bring to an end some historic and ongoing arrangements. And if that's right and proper to do so, then we'll do that. Now, one of the questions that it keeps coming back to, which Kathy already mentioned, is we should have a graduated approach. What we need to do is to achieve a sustainable position, but a fair and a transparent position. So we need to be matching the needs of our children against what that graduated approach is, and understanding where on that spectrum, if you like, of approach a young person is, and what a school can expect if the child falls in part of that, and what that offer would look like. Now, that offer is not necessarily always going to be a cash offer. That offer might be access to other interventional support that the local authority can commission for and on behalf of the school, so that they get access to interventional support rather than access to cash. But what it will also mean, and again, this is one of the major changes that we need to implement, is when there are enduring needs for a child, then that child should have an education, health and care plan. And that's the appropriate provision and appropriate support for that child. It doesn't mean that when a child then drops off at Key Stage 2 and goes into Key Stage 3, a school is still accessing funding, but the child's moved on. So there is much to disentangle. We're in a position that's further forward than the last time we spoke about this, but we're not at the end of understanding that. We have got a deadline around that and about the lines and the details in that budget, and that deadline is January, because the schools forum and those papers will be public. So the schools forum in January will be looking at all of the detail. They're asking me exactly the same questions on high needs and high needs funding as members are through this forum, and that information will be prepared for schools forum in January, where I would expect to be able to account for all of the money that is on the high needs block and where that spend is going. So again, I've got about another 3 or 4 weeks, I think, to get all of that detail together for the schools forum, so they can see that spend on high needs block. But it will inevitably lead to some difficult conversations.
Super. Thank you again, Anne-Marie, for that. So I've got Philip.
Thank you. Thank you for your openness and honesty there. It's you certainly sound like you've got an intent to really get this sorted out. This tremendous deficit that we've got. I've got a few questions. Can I sort of ask them all together in one go? So first of all, how does this 2 million going up to 3 million deficit compare to other similar authorities to us? Is there a good authority, an authority that you regard as good and that has good practice that we can learn from? And in a year's time, what do you think you'll be telling us about the deficit?
So in terms of similar numbers and authority, I was in Haringey immediately before I was here. Their numbers on education, health and care plans are broadly similar to the numbers that we had on education, health and care plans in April of this year. And therefore, you would expect to see similar sort of financial limits on the DSG. And I think from memory that was in excess of 10 million. Well, it was in excess of 10 million. So very, very different I know that there are some, so our entirety of our schools, our dedicated schools grant is in excess of 600 million. The majority of that, of course, goes to schools. But there are local authorities who have almost 100% overspend on their high needs block. So, you know, we are not taking lightly the fact that we have a multi-million-pound deficit on high needs, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not as, you know, as bleak as it might be. But that doesn't mean that it's all right, because ultimately that money still needs to come from somewhere. What we will need to do is we will need to prepare for the Department for Education a deficit recovery plan. So it's not just the scrutiny of members and the scrutiny of the schools forum that we will have around the spend. It is also the scrutiny of the Department for Education. Now, where some of my, you know, peers across the country might shy away from that, I welcome really the scrutiny of members. I welcome the scrutiny of the schools forum to this problem, because it's a system-wide problem, it's a system-wide challenge. It shouldn't just be the challenge of officers or members from a local authority. Everybody has a part to play in getting a solution on this. So I think the additional scrutiny on this spend can only assist us in helping people understand that we need to be clear and we need to be transparent about what we're spending, and actually we need to have difficult conversations. And if we can all see everything, I think that will help. Are there areas of good practice? I think I wouldn't point to a single authority that has good practice from start to finish on this. I think if you were to look at the recent and probably the last 12-18 months worth of inspections on SEN, the majority of those inspections on SEN received something called a written statement of action, which essentially is a series of, a little bit like you have an Ofsted inspection for children's services and you get a judgment. You don't get a judgment on SEN, but what you do get is a written statement of action, which is a little bit like, colleagues will be more familiar with the Ofsted responses than the Ofsted report. So the actions there that they say you need to work on, local authorities get those in the form of a written statement of action. The actions on there are generally for partners and right across the partnership. So we're in the right position now in pulling the partners together in terms of the SEND Accountability Board to hold them to account for their performance as part of this solution, shared solution. In a year's time, I don't want to preempt the decisions of the schools forum tomorrow, but the schools forum tomorrow will be making some judgments and we'll be voting on some of the movement of money across the different blocks. I mean, essentially it's from the schools block into the high needs block. We have consulted with the schools forum about that. We proposed a 1.3% shift from the schools block into the high needs block. 30 of the 33 respondents didn't agree to that, so we're not going to vote on it, which I think is the right way. We are going back to that co-production. It's important that we're seen to be working with and listening to and not doing to. So if people are saying we won't go for that, then I think it's appropriate that we don't vote on it. So we will be seeking the agreement of schools forum to shift 0.5%, which we're entitled to do without approval from the Secretary of State. So we'll be seeking approval tomorrow through schools forum to shift 0.5% into the high needs block, which will assist us in that deficit. As I said, we've got a number of mitigating actions that are trying to manage that spend on high needs block. In part, that is having a very candid and transparent conversations with schools. I'm doing that. They don't believe me. Nor should they, really. When you're trying to be transparent with them, they assume that you're actually trying to hide something. So in time, hopefully they'll realise when I say something is actually the thing that I say, it's not something else. But, you know, we'll have to learn that together. If I'm honest, I'm not going to be able to say that the deficit's gone in 12 months' time, because I can't do that myself. I need everybody else to wake up and understand that. I would like to be saying to you in 12 months' time that we have gone to the schools forum, and the schools forum over this last 12 months have understood the nature and the scale of the problem and the actions that we collectively need to take to manage the deficit. And therefore we have agreed that there are different actions that we can take. It may be that we're suggesting at that stage that they would be happy to take more than 0.5%, but it might not, I don't know. But I think what I would be able to report to you is people are taking or being more proactive and more pragmatic about our approach to children who have special educational needs and disabilities. And when we seek plans and how well schools hold on to those children with support, that they're seeing the solution as an intervention and support from multiple partners, and not just intervention and solution via the means of cash to the schools, and that we've changed our approach, that SEND's become everybody's responsibility in the same way that we talk about safeguarding being everyone's responsibility. But let's just see. You can play it back. You can play it back in 12 months, and we can have a test. I might look a bit greyer and a bit older, but I'm not sure I'd have fixed your budget problems. But there you go. I'll try.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Dorothy.
Well, yeah, I have probably 4 questions actually. So the first question is, how many children are we actually have out of county having educational needs with them at the present moment, or in schools outside county?
I can't give you that, but we can find that one out for you.
Okay. So the next thing is, given the fact that, you know, clearly people who have educational needs requirements, they change each year. You know, obviously we know that, you know, as children get older, their requirements may change according to whatever crops up, because the education that they're receiving changes because it's more demanding. Do you think the government is aware that there is, given that the last 2 years has been something of a bit of a surreal situation, that more money needs to come into counties in order to meet the needs of children who may not have necessarily needed SEN assessments, but do now because of what's happened? Do you think that that's something that the government need to be aware of in that sense? And my next question is, do you think that schools feel that they have more knowledge about why they need more funding? You know, whilst you may say, right, we have control over the budget, they may feel that if they had more control, they could actually resolve some of the issues that they're now finding themselves in. And lastly, although it's not on the agenda, it was going to be on the agenda, about 2 schools in Rushden. I'm interested, is this part of saving money, or have you not really, or is that not part of this package?
I'll answer that last question for you, Dorothy. It is coming to EAP next month. It's going to executive next month as well. And the answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
So I can, in terms of what schools feel, I wouldn't deem to even try to tell you what schools feel. So I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on that. We, and just to be absolutely clear, and I you know, forgive me if I didn't make that clear as we started, we don't control the school's budget. The schools absolutely control
their own budget
via the schools forum. That's not mine. It's not my budget. It comes through us. It's passported out to the schools. They're in control of it. So I guess I can't. There's no answer from me on either of those points, Councillor Maxwell.
And of course, the government, if the government gave more money to help children with educational needs, special educational needs, that would actually probably make your life more easier, because you could actually employ, for example, a speech therapist or somebody who needs a psychologist. You know, you could actually input that in where at the moment you may be governed by not being able to do it at the moment.
Councillor Maxwell, I'll leave that one with you and you can come back to me when you've got an answer.
Yeah. Can I go? I was going to say, I'll escort you up to number 10, Dorothy, so we can have that conversation with Boris. You know, it is difficult. I think there is some government recognition about the challenges in the system. They have given additional funding to some local authorities that are absolutely massively overspent on their high needs block. Unfortunately, in some ways, we weren't overspent enough, so we didn't recoup any of that funding. They were, you know, as Anne-Marie has set out, there are some local authorities that are 80 million overspent. There is a reform of the SEND. There is a review of SEND. And so again, there is a recognition that that's been delayed for a long period of time. So we're waiting for that review to see what it would say, because I think if we went back to 2014, the reforms that the government did then are in part responsible for some of the position that we're currently sat in. Yeah. So I think they need to make some amends along those lines. I think what we have to all, and as you know, you all recognised, and Anne-Marie's been very clear, this isn't just an education issue. It is absolutely an issue across the system, leadership, for heads, social care, and everyone. And we need to work together on that. And I think the funding, for some of the funding, it needs to be managed in some ways in this way, because obviously it means that we get equality in the system. Whereas if schools held on to some of this budget themselves, then we're not going to get equality, perhaps. There is a new inspection framework that should be coming out in terms of SEND. And as Anne-Marie said, currently, if you have an inspection framework, the majority of local authorities are asked to write a written statement of action to the DfE. What's currently being discussed and challenged is the fact that they are looking at a Ofsted type rating. Now, that's a bit of a challenge because that rating should be for everybody in that system, not just the council. And I think there's that fear that as a council, we will end up carrying that rating, not the CCG, not primary care, not social care. And so it's, how do you make sure that this is absolutely seen as a collective issue, and or not the schools that help you manage that SEND system, because it will be collective rating. So just to let you know that also is in the offing, and we'll keep you updated, informed of how that progresses.
I'd be interested in that. So yes, I think that's a very positive point, actually, that and obviously if we get rated as a county differently, for instance Cambridgeshire, you know, people will start coming back and criticising what you're not doing, when in fact you are doing, but they won't see it as why you've done certain things. So thank you.
And I guess we've all lived through the experience of an inadequate rating of social care and what happens at that point, whereas a written statement of action is like forward thinking, we're doing something about it, but the challenges around being considered inadequate is you know, is not really a positive, is it?
No, it's not good at all.
Yeah.
No, definitely. No. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Right, okay, so if we move on to item 6, which is the forward plan of executive items. Louise, have you got this?
Yes, Chairman, it's the standing item that you have, just explaining what's coming to the executive from between December and March, and it's just identifying any issues that may be relevant to this panel.
Okay, have you got a slide with that on, or?
No, it's with the papers.
Okay, I'll scroll through. Okay, does anybody have any issues or comments within that? No, perfect, thank you very much. Thank you, Louise. And then we move back to the forward list of items, so page 17 to 18. Any other questions or comments or anything that anybody would like adding to it? No, sorry, Dorothy. You're on mute, Dorothy.
Sorry. I'd find it interesting if, for instance, we could have more statistics, for example, which would be interesting to find out how many, for example, how many SEN children that we're actually looking after at the moment in the county, and how many are actually outside county. But equally, how many children at the present moment are not necessarily getting an education. You know, statistics about the ones who don't attend school, for example, or the children, and also children who fall in the 76 that I spoke to, who have actually found themselves on the other side of the law. It would be quite interesting if we could have some update on, from the perspective of children's services, of how we are dealing with some sectors of children that we're not necessarily aware of. And also the other factor is how we're actually looking at speech therapists, how many speech therapists are actually going into schools at the present moment. It'd be quite nice to know how many children speech therapists, for example, are being seen at the present. So I think having statistical evidence would be quite useful for us. Okay,
that's fine. So you've mentioned a whole broad range of subjects there.
Yes.
So so what I'll ask is that absolutely, and you know, statistics are always good because we can compare and contrast. So we'll look at the different areas that we move forward with, and you mentioned about children that have been involved with the police and things, so we can get a report on that, along with the youth justice plan, which went through last month, did it, or the month before?
Yeah.
So when that comes up again, which it will do, we can include more statistics within that to give you a better understanding of that. And then in the different areas that you've mentioned, like psychology review and things, we can look at the statistics within that.
And can we also maybe think about, if we're looking at that, is how, if we move forward from the point of view where we said that some children didn't get an education, how's that going to be improved? Are they going to be given laptops or homeschooling? What are we actually going to be doing about that to make sure that these children do not fall off the cliff, basically?
Yeah, certainly we can look into that, Dorothy. Not a problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Thanks, Scott. Just picking up on something that Dorothy said, it might be helpful to have a narrative around homeschooled children, particularly in how that may have increased over since COVID, and how many have gone back.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good area to discuss, actually, because I think it is something that's been increased with parents not wanting to send children back to school, and a whole different range of subjects within that. So absolutely, that's something we can look into. And Philip.
Yeah, I don't know whether this could be linked into that. I mean, yes, it would be interesting to know a bit more about the homeschool children in our authority area, because I have no idea of figures at all, or of provision. Does this link at all with, do we still use the phrase NEET as in not in education? We still use that?
We do,
I mean,
yes. Yeah.
I'm conscious, I don't think we've, in this forum, we've really discussed very much about skills and employment support. I don't know whether at the same time or as a separate thing, we could be discussing numbers of those not in education, employment, etc. What we're doing about them. I'm looking at the skills aspect of our brief.
Yeah, no, that's superb, Philip. We can. Kathy, did you want to speak? Sorry.
No, all I was going to say is, yeah, we have a contract with a company called Prospects who could come and do a presentation on that specific item. Yeah.
Superb. So yeah. Excellent, that's great. So I think we've got a great range moving forward as well. But as ever, if you've got any questions or any personal kind of things, do forward them, and we can certainly look into them. That's not a problem. It moves to item 8, which is the close of the meeting. But before I do close the meeting, I want to wish you all a very happy Christmas. It's not long off now, and look forward to seeing you all in January. Take care.
Happy Christmas, everyone. Bye.
Bye.